Or move out, preferably before the weekend. The words sliced through the quiet air of my living room, sharp and cruel. They came from my husband's pregnant sister, Nina, but it was the deafening silence from my husband, Leo, that truly broke me. Nina stood there with a nasty smirk on her face, one hand resting on her round belly as if it were a weapon. She was daring me to say something, to fight back. My eyes darted to Leo, pleading with him to step in, to defend me, to defend us. I waited for him to laugh it off as a terrible joke or to pull me aside and promise to sort it out. But he did nothing. He just stared at the wooden floorboards, his shoulders slumped in defeat. His silence was his answer. In that one awful moment, I understood everything. He wasn't on my side. He had already made his choice. A strange, icy calm settled over me, pushing down the screaming panic that was trying to claw its way up my throat. My own home, the place I felt safest in the world, suddenly felt like enemy territory. Without a single word, I turned away from them, walked up the stairs with a heavy heart, and shut our bedroom door behind me. My hands felt steady as I pulled a bag from the top of the closet. There was no time for tears. There was only a cold, hollow ache where my 5-year marriage used to be. Just that morning, the world had been warm and full of light. I had woken up to the comforting smell of freshly brewed coffee, a weekend treat Leo always made. He had leaned over to kiss my forehead, his voice soft as he whispered, "Morning, beautiful," the same way he had for years. Our life felt simple and happy. I spent the morning in my office, a cozy room bathed in sunlight, working on a new design project. This house was more than just walls and a roof to me. It was the only thing I had left of my parents, bought with the inheritance they left me. Every room held a piece of my history, a ghost of a happy memory. This house was my sanctuary, my foundation. The first hint of a crack appeared around noon. Leo's phone rang, and he quickly walked into the hallway to answer it, his voice dropping to a low, urgent whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but the tension in his voice was unmistakable. When he came back into the office, his face was pale, and his smile was tight and unnatural. "Everything okay?" I asked, swiveling in my chair to face him. "Yeah, just work stuff," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "You know how it is. Just a stressful project." I let it go because I trusted him. I believed in the life we were building together, brick by brick. Looking back now, I see how blind I was. The signs were all there, like little warning flags I had refused to see. The hushed phone calls late at night, the worried expression he wore when he thought I wasn't looking, the emotional distance that had slowly grown between us. I had explained it all away, blaming it on his demanding job. I wanted to believe in our perfect little world so badly that I ignored anything that threatened it. Later that afternoon, I was putting the final touches on my project when the doorbell rang. It wasn't a friendly chime, but a loud, impatient buzz that echoed through the quiet house. Leo had gone out to run a few errands, so I was alone. I walked to the front door, a little annoyed at the interruption. I peered through the small peephole, and my stomach twisted into a knot. Standing on my porch was Nina, my sister-in-law, and her quiet, shadow-like husband, Greg. Between them sat 2 enormous suitcases, looking heavy and permanent. They weren't here for a quick hello. I took a deep, steadying breath, forced a polite smile onto my face, and turned the handle. I opened the door, completely unaware that I was not just welcoming guests, but inviting in the storm that would tear my entire life apart. I swung the door open, my practiced hostess smile feeling stiff on my face. "Nina, Greg, what a surprise." My voice sounded unnaturally cheerful, even to my own ears. Nina didn't return the smile. She brushed past me into the entryway, her husband trailing silently behind her like a ship's rudder. "The traffic was a nightmare," she announced, running a critical eye over my decor. "Honestly, I don't know how anyone lives this far out. It's so stressful, and with the baby..." She let the sentence hang in the air, a clear accusation that my home's location was an inconvenience specifically designed to harm her unborn child. I stared at the 2 suitcases they had dragged in behind them. They weren't small weekend-sized bags. They were the large, heavy kind you take when you're not planning on leaving anytime soon. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. "Are you guys staying for a while?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "My apartment is just too small," Nina said, ignoring my question as she wandered into the living room. She ran a hand over the back of my favorite armchair. "The fumes from the street, the constant noise. It's no place to bring a baby home to. We need space. We need peace and quiet." She looked around my peaceful, quiet living room with a look of profound satisfaction, as if she were a queen surveying her new kingdom. Just then, I heard the back door open. It was Leo, home from his errands. A wave of relief washed over me. He would know what was going on. He would handle this. "Leo, thank goodness," I started, turning to him. But the look on his face stopped me cold. There was no surprise, no confusion, just a strained, overly bright smile. "Nina, you made it!" he exclaimed, rushing over to hug his sister carefully. He didn't even glance at me. He fussed over her, taking her coat, asking if she was tired, if she needed a glass of water, if she wanted to put her feet up. It was a well-rehearsed performance, and I was clearly not part of the cast. I was just an audience member, watching a play I didn't know had been written. I felt invisible. While he settled Nina onto the sofa, fluffing a pillow behind her back, I pulled him toward the kitchen. "Leo, what is going on?" I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. "Why are they here with suitcases? Did you know about this?" He wouldn't look at me. He busied himself with getting a glass from the cupboard, his movements jerky. "Clara, please, not now," he muttered. "She's pregnant. Her doctor said she needs to avoid stress. Her apartment is causing her anxiety. Let's just make her comfortable." "Make her comfortable? In our house? For how long?" The questions tumbled out, but he offered no answers. He just walked back into the living room, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen with a cold dread spreading through my veins. I followed him back, feeling like a stranger in my own home. The 3 of them were talking quietly, making plans. My plans, in my house. I had to say something. I had to take back control. I cleared my throat, and they all looked at me. For the first time, I felt like the intruder. "It's lovely to see you both," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "But this is very short notice. You're welcome to stay in the guest room for a night or 2, of course, while you figure things out." The room went silent. Nina looked at Leo, a silent command in her eyes. Leo, still refusing to look at me, spoke to his sister. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Take the guest room." It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. He was giving away a piece of my home, of my life, without even asking. Before I could even process the sting of his betrayal, Nina leaned forward. She looked directly at me, her eyes gleaming with a cruel, triumphant light. A smirk played on her lips as she delivered the final blow. "Or move out, preferably before the weekend." The world tilted. The air was sucked from my lungs. It was the smirk that did it. The casual, calculated cruelty of it all. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an invasion, a coup, and my own husband was leading it. In that moment of horrifying clarity, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply stood up. I walked past Nina's smug face and Greg's empty one. I walked past my husband, the man who had vowed to love and protect me. I went upstairs, packed my bag, and walked back down. I didn't look at them as I opened the front door and stepped out into the cold evening air, closing it softly behind me. I drove on autopilot, the city lights blurring into long streaks of red and gold through my tear-filled eyes. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white, but I couldn't feel the cold plastic beneath my fingers. I couldn't feel much of anything except a deep, hollow ache that resonated with the hum of the engine. The scene in the living room played on a loop in my head. Nina's triumphant smirk, Greg's passive stare, and Leo's silent, soul-crushing betrayal. Each replay was another twist of the knife. I don't even remember deciding where to go. My car just seemed to know, carrying me through the familiar streets to the one place I knew I would be safe. My best friend Zoe's apartment. I must have looked like a ghost when she opened the door, because the smile on her face vanished instantly, replaced by a look of deep concern. She didn't bombard me with questions. She didn't need to. She just pulled me into a hug that felt like it was holding my shattered pieces together. She led me to her sofa, wrapped a thick blanket around my shoulders, and placed a warm mug of tea in my trembling hands. For the first hour, I just sat there, staring into the steam, unable to form the words to explain what had happened. Finally, the dam broke. The story spilled out of me in a messy, hiccuping torrent of confusion and pain. Zoe listened patiently, her expression hardening as I spoke. When I finished, she just shook her head slowly. "Clara, that's not just a misunderstanding. That's a hostile takeover." Her words were harsh, but they were true. Still, a small, foolish part of me clung to hope. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe Leo would call, full of apologies, and explain everything. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over his name. "I need to call him," I whispered. "I need to hear him say it was a mistake." I called once. It rang and rang until it went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. A third time. Voicemail. The hope began to curdle into a sick, heavy dread. I was about to try a fourth time when my phone screen lit up with a text message from him. My heart leapt. He was finally going to explain. I opened the message. It was only 7 words. "We can talk when you've calmed down." That was it. No apology, no explanation, just a cold, dismissive command. "When you've calmed down." As if I were a hysterical child throwing a tantrum, as if my pain and confusion were an inconvenience to him. Something inside me snapped. The deep, aching sadness didn't just disappear, it crystallized. It turned into something hard and sharp, like a shard of ice in my chest. It was anger. A pure, cold, clarifying anger. He wasn't worried about me. He was managing me. A sudden, terrible thought struck me. An instinct. If this was a calculated plan, how far did it go? My hands shook for a different reason now as I opened my banking app. We had a joint savings account where we kept our emergency fund and the money we were saving for a future vacation. It was our safety net. I navigated to the accounts page, my breath caught in my throat. The screen loaded, and my heart stopped. Joint savings account, 1754. It was supposed to be over $50,000. I frantically scrolled down the transaction history, my eyes scanning for an error, a glitch, anything. And then I saw it. A single, massive transaction. Withdrawal, counter. Amount $52,000. My eyes flew to the date next to it. It wasn't today. It wasn't yesterday. It was from 3 days ago. The day Leo had taken that hushed, tense phone call he claimed was work stuff. The pieces slammed into place with brutal force. The strange behavior, the surprise visit, the suitcases, the ultimatum. This wasn't a spontaneous family crisis. It was a premeditated ambush, and it had been in motion for days. They hadn't just come for my home. They had come for everything. The number on the screen didn't seem real. 1754. It was such a small, pathetic amount to have left. A few cups of coffee, not a future. I stared at it, the glowing digits burning into my eyes, until Zoe gently took the phone from my hands. The cold dread from the kitchen had returned, but this time it was different. It was a suffocating, crushing weight. It wasn't just the money, it was the lie. Leo, my husband, had looked me in the eyes day after day, kissed me good morning, and all the while, he was methodically dismantling our life together. He had drained our shared hopes and dreams into his own secret, desperate hole. My mind was a hurricane of panicked thoughts. What was the money for? Why did they need it so badly? My thoughts spiraled downwards, imagining the worst. They could sell my furniture, my belongings, anything to get more cash. And then, the ultimate fear. The house. They were in my house. My safe place. My sanctuary. They wanted it. Nina had made that perfectly clear. Panic seized me. What if he could take it? What if his name was on something I'd forgotten? And then, like a single clear bell chiming through the storm, a memory surfaced. I was 24 years old, sitting in a stuffy lawyer's office. The air smelled of old paper and furniture polish. My father's lawyer, a kind man with gentle eyes, slid a thick stack of documents across the polished mahogany desk toward me. It was the deed to the house. I remembered his words as clearly as if he were sitting next to me on Zoe's sofa. "This inheritance is from your parents, Clara," he had said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the signature line. "It is for you, and you alone. We've structured it so the deed is solely in your name. That's very important. It protects you. It protects their legacy. Never let anyone, not even a husband, pressure you into changing that." At the time, I thought he was just being overly cautious. I was young and in love and couldn't imagine a world where Leo would ever be a threat. But I had listened. The deed was in my name. Only my name. A wave of something hot and powerful surged through my veins, chasing away the icy dread. It was relief, so profound it almost made me dizzy. The ground, which had felt like it was crumbling beneath my feet, suddenly felt solid again. They had taken our savings, but they couldn't take my foundation. They couldn't take my home. The anger I felt before began to sharpen, transforming from a wild, desperate emotion into a focused, cold point of light. The game had changed. I wasn't just a victim being pushed out. I was the owner of the board they were trying to play on. Just as this new resolve was settling in my bones, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was an unfamiliar number, but something told me to answer. I took a deep breath and swiped the screen. "Hello? Clara, dear? It's Deborah." My mother-in-law's voice was like syrup, thick and sweet, and designed to hide a bitter taste. "Oh, I've been so worried. Leo told me you had a little tiff and ran off. I was just calling to make sure you were all right." I stayed silent, letting her talk. "I know you must be upset, dear," she continued, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "But you have to understand. Nina is in such a delicate condition. That tiny apartment of hers is just not good for the baby. We all have to make sacrifices for family. You need to be the bigger person here, Clara, for the baby's sake." Every word was a carefully chosen weapon, designed to make me feel selfish and unreasonable. But it had the opposite effect. Her sweet, manipulative voice was the final piece of the puzzle. I could hear the lie in her tone. This wasn't Leo being weak or Nina being greedy. This was a coordinated attack, and I was looking at the general. Deborah wasn't calling to check on me. She was calling to manage the situation, to ensure her plan was still on track. "I understand," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Good," she cooed, clearly thinking she had won. "You just calm down, have a good think, and come on home. We're all family here." I ended the call without another word. The fog of confusion and grief had completely lifted. I knew exactly what I was up against. They hadn't just stumbled into my house. They had marched in with a plan. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. That was a mistake they were all about to regret. The moment I hung up with Deborah, the last wisps of grief and confusion vanished, burned away by a cold, hard rage. Her sweet, manipulative voice was like gasoline on the fire of my anger. They thought I was a pushover. They thought I would cry for a few days, accept my fate, and quietly hand over my life for the sake of the baby. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The first call I made the next morning was to a lawyer Zoe had recommended. I explained the situation in a calm, level voice that surprised even myself. He was direct and efficient. "The house is solely in your name?" "Excellent. That is your fortress, Clara. They are illegal occupants, but we need to act carefully. Your first step is to secure your property and your personal documents. Can you get back into the house?" His words armed me with a plan. That afternoon, I watched from my car, parked a block away like a common criminal casing a joint. I waited until I saw Nina and Greg leave in their car, followed shortly after by Leo. My heart hammered against my ribs as I slid my key into the lock of my own front door. The click of the tumbler turning felt unnaturally loud. Stepping inside was surreal. It was my house, but it wasn't my home anymore. A pair of Nina's shoes were kicked off carelessly by the door. A half-eaten bag of chips sat on the coffee table. The air smelled different, tainted by their presence. I felt a sickening sense of trespass, of violation. I forced the feeling down and focused on my mission. I quickly went to my office and gathered my passport, birth certificate, and the all-important deed to the house. With the documents safely in my tote bag, I hesitated. A nagging feeling told me there was something more, a piece of the puzzle I was still missing. The $52,000. Where did it go? Why did they need it so urgently? On a hunch, I went upstairs to our bedroom. My side of the room was untouched, a perfect little island of my former life. But Leo's side was messier than usual. Clothes were draped over a chair, and his nightstand was cluttered. My eyes scanned the room and landed on his closet. Leo was a creature of habit. He kept everything. Old yearbooks, college textbooks, stacks of concert ticket stubs. He never threw anything away. I opened the closet door and was met with the familiar smell of his cologne and old leather. I started at the back, behind the neat rows of shoes he never wore. I pushed aside boxes of old photos and stacks of magazines until my fingers brushed against something hard and cold. It was a small metal box, the kind you'd use for petty cash. It was locked. My heart began to beat faster. I remembered a spare key hidden in the back of his sock drawer. It was still there. My hands trembled slightly as I fit the tiny key into the lock. It turned with a quiet click. I lifted the lid, expecting to find old love letters or sentimental trinkets. But there was nothing sentimental inside. The box was packed tight with envelopes, dozens of them. They were all unopened, all addressed to Leo at a P.O. box I didn't recognize. My eyes were immediately drawn to the angry red ink stamped across the front of the top one. Final notice. I pulled it out. It was from a credit card company I'd never heard of. I tore it open. The amount owed made my breath catch in my throat. It was a staggering figure. I grabbed another envelope. This one was a different color, but the red stamp was the same. Urgent. Legal action pending. It was a notice of default on a personal loan. Again, the amount was astronomical. One by one, I opened them. They were all the same. Default notices, final warnings, threats from aggressive debt collectors. The debt wasn't just big, it was catastrophic. It was a mountain of secret loans and maxed-out credit cards that he had been hiding from me for years. The missing $52,000 was a drop in the ocean. It was a desperate, panicked payment to keep the wolves from the door for another week, maybe two. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. They didn't just want my house. They needed it. It was their only way out. Leo wasn't just weak. He was drowning. And his entire family had conspired to use my life, my inheritance from my dead parents, as their personal life raft. The metal box felt cold and heavy in my hands, a perfect symbol for the secrets it contained. There were no more tears left to cry. The grief had been burned away, leaving behind something clean and hard as steel. Resolve. Leo wasn't just a man who made a mistake. He was a con artist, and his family were his willing accomplices. My mother-in-law's saccharine voice echoed in my ears. Be the bigger person. And I finally understood. To them, being the bigger person meant letting them walk all over me. That wasn't going to happen. Following my lawyer's advice to the letter, I hired a locksmith the very next day. He was a quiet man with kind eyes who didn't ask any questions as he methodically drilled out the old locks on my front and back doors. The high-pitched whine of the drill was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my old life, my gullibility, being permanently removed. He handed me a set of new, shiny keys that felt solid and real in my palm. They were the keys to my fortress, and I was the only one who had a copy. Before I left, I took out the formal eviction notice my lawyer had drafted. It was a single sheet of paper, printed in stark black ink, outlining their status as illegal occupants and giving them 24 hours to vacate the premises. With 4 pieces of tape, I secured it to the middle of the front door. It looked so official, so final, a stark white rectangle against the dark wood. My last act was installing the new doorbell camera, a small, discreet device that would be my eyes and ears. It was my shield, allowing me to see the battle without having to be on the front lines. Then I waited. For 3 days I stayed with Zoe, my phone always by my side. The days were strangely calm. The storm of emotion had passed, leaving a quiet, focused stillness in its wake. I wasn't pacing or panicking. I was preparing. I was waiting for the enemy to realize the walls of the castle they thought they had captured were now impenetrable. On the 3rd afternoon, it happened. A simple ding from my phone signaled a motion alert at my front door. My heart gave a single hard thump and then settled. It was time. I opened the live feed on my phone. The image was crystal clear. It was Nina and Greg strolling up the walkway. They were laughing about something, their arms laden with shopping bags from expensive stores. They looked relaxed, entitled, like the lords of the manor returning from a leisurely outing. I watched as Nina, balancing her bags, dug the old key from her purse. She slid it into the lock. I saw the familiar jiggle, followed by a confused push. She tried again, with more force. Nothing. Her smile vanished, replaced by a frown of annoyance. "What is this?" I could hear her muffled voice through the camera's speaker. "Greg, try your key. Mine's not working." Greg, ever the follower, fumbled for his keys and tried his. The result was the same. The door remained shut. Nina's annoyance quickly morphed into frustration. She started banging on the door, the thud of her fist against my door echoing through my phone. "Clara! Open the door! What kind of stupid game is this?" she yelled. When there was no answer, a look of genuine panic began to creep across her face. She stepped back, her eyes landing on the white piece of paper taped to the door. I watched as she read it, her face turning pale. She snatched it off the door, her hands shaking as she read it again. Then she whirled around, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. She pulled out her phone, her fingers jabbing at the screen. I knew who she was calling. It was the person who had orchestrated this whole thing. I turned the volume on my phone all the way up, my ear pressed close to the speaker. I heard the phone on the other end pick up. Nina's voice, no longer smug and condescending, but high and shaking with panic, crackled through my phone's speaker. "Mom, please, tell me she's lying. You said the house was mostly Leo's." The words crackled through my phone's speaker, a perfect, undeniable recording of their deceit. "You said the house was mostly Leo's." Nina's panicked cry wasn't just a question. It was the entire foundation of their cruel plan crumbling into dust. A strange calm washed over me. It wasn't the satisfaction of being right, but the grim finality of knowing it was all true. They had built their house of cards on a lie, and I was about to blow it all down. I didn't wait. I didn't hesitate. I opened my phone and composed a single group text to Leo, Nina, and Deborah. I attached 2 images. The first was a crystal-clear screenshot of the house deed, with my name and only my name, circled in red. The second was a picture of the open metal box, the pile of red-stamped envelopes spilling out like a terrible secret. My message was short, cold, and final. 1 hour. Come get your things. I drove to the house and stood in my entryway, the front door wide open, waiting. They arrived in less than 45 minutes, pulling up in Deborah's car. They didn't look like conquerors anymore. Leo looked haggard and broken, his eyes red-rimmed and fixed on the ground. Nina's face was blotchy and swollen, her expression a mask of pure fury. But it was Deborah who went on the attack. The sweet, concerned act was gone, replaced by a face like thunder. "Clara, this is a ridiculous misunderstanding," she began, her voice sharp and commanding. "You can't just throw family out onto the street." "You are not my family," I said, my voice low and steady. I pointed to the metal box I had placed on the entryway table. And this is not a misunderstanding, this is a conspiracy. That's when Leo broke. A terrible, ragged sob tore from his chest, and he sank onto the bottom step of the staircase, burying his face in his hands. "I'm so sorry, Clara," he choked out, his words muffled. "The debts? I didn't know what to do. I was going to lose everything." He looked up, his eyes pleading, not with me, but with his mother. "Mom came up with the plan," he confessed, the truth spilling out in a desperate flood. "She said Nina and the baby needed a better place. She said if they moved in, you'd feel pressured. That for the baby's sake, you'd eventually agree to add my name to the deed so we could take a loan against the house. She said you'd never say no to a baby." The ugly truth hung in the air, more damning than anything I could have imagined. Deborah's face turned white with rage, not at her son's betrayal, but at his confession. Nina, however, just stared at Leo with pure disgust. "You idiot!" she shrieked, her voice venomous. "You weak, pathetic idiot. I can't believe I trusted you to handle this." There was no remorse, no apology, only rage that their perfect plan had been ruined by the one person who was supposed to benefit the most. While they were distracted by their own toxic implosion, I stepped forward. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick envelope. I walked over to Leo and held it out to him. He looked up at it, confused. "These are for you, Leo," I said, my voice clear and unwavering. He took the envelope, his hands trembling as he opened it. His face fell as he saw the legal documents inside. Divorce papers. "Our marriage is over. Consider this my final notice." There were no more arguments, no more threats. Just the quiet, shuffling sound of defeat as they gathered their suitcases and shopping bags and carried them out to the car. I stood by the door and watched them go. 3 people bound together not by love, but by their shared greed and desperation. When the door finally closed, the silence that filled the house was different. It wasn't empty or lonely. It was clean. It was peaceful. The air felt lighter, as if the very walls had exhaled a breath they had been holding for years. I walked through the rooms, my home, touching the furniture, looking out the windows. The house wasn't just wood and nails anymore. It was a symbol. It was a fortress I had defended. It was a home I had reclaimed. Standing alone in the quiet of my living room, I wasn't scared. For the first time in a very long time, I was free.